Good day viewers, once again you're welcome to your class on English grammar, and then today we would be looking at the topic the passive sentence. And as you can see, under the passive sentence we would like to talk about the description or definition. Don't forget I told you in one of our classes ago that in grammar we hardly define. Yes, we hardly define, and one of the reasons for that is because most of these terminologies, they don't really have a specific definition like that. So the best thing we actually use for grammar is that we describe terminologies. So we'll be looking at a description slash definition of the passive sentence. We'll look at the transformational processes that occur in the formation of passive sentences. We would consider the conditions for passive transformation. The conditions that a particular sentence must have undergone or must have, or the particular conditions that can make or that can allow a particular sentence to be formed into a passive sentence. And then we look at the different types of passive sentences that we have in English, and then we consider the reasons for the use of passive sentence. Why do we use passive sentences? So those are the things that you would learn in this particular topic as you go on with us. Now let's start with the first one, which is the description of the passive sentence. So what is a passive sentence? What is a passive sentence? Now, if you remember perhaps primary or secondary school, that you must have learned something around active sentences and passive sentences before. So an active sentence and a passive sentence. So I will give you an example of an active sentence and also give an example of a passive sentence, and then we'll be able to describe what makes an active sentence different from a passive sentence. So let me give you an example like David killed the lion. David killed the lion. Now, this sentence is an active sentence. What makes it an active sentence? Look at this first item. You see that David in this sentence is a subject, am I right? Killed is your verb or predicator. Then the lion is your object or complement extensive, if I'm not mistaken. Now look at the passive sentence of this same sentence. So we want to try to express this same sentence in a passive form. So we have something like the lion was killed by David. So the lion this time around is your subject, was killed is your predicator, and by David is an adjunct. So what is the difference between the first sentence which we have, where we had David killed the lion, and where we had the lion was killed by David? First of all, you actually realize that they are, when we talk about the similarities, both of them are actually expressing the same thing. The most important thing was that something was killed. Am I right? So in the first sentence and the second sentence, the important thing is that something was killed, and that thing was a lion or the lion, and then the killing of the lion was done by a particular person by the name David. So David as we have in the first sentence, and David also as we have in the second sentence. So now look at the fact that they actually almost look the same thing when it comes to meaning making, because they have the same meaning. But then what now makes them different grammatically or structurally? That is where our description of the passive sentence takes place. Now, a sentence based on voice can be divided into two, as you've known. We have what we call the active voice, and then we have what we call the passive voice. So all of these things are called voices. So a sentence based on voice can be divided into two. So we have what we call the active voice, and then we have what we call the passive voice. So one active sentence is one whose subject is usually the performer of the action. Now, the subject of the active is usually the performer of the action denoted by the verb. So what is the action denoted by the verb here? We have killed. The action was killed here too. So the subject of the active sentence is usually the one performing the action. Now if you hear the sentence David killed the lion, if I ask you who killed the lion, what's your answer or what's your response? David. Do you understand that? So David killed the lion. So in the active sentence, the subject is usually the performer of the action. The subject is usually the performer of the action. But then for a passive sentence, the subject is usually the receiver. Subject of the passive sentence, subject, passive, is usually the receiver or the undergoer of the action. Now what does that mean? Now look at this passive sentence that we have here. What is the predicator or what's the action? Was killed also, am I right? Exactly. And then what's the subject? The lion. Now if I ask you what was killed, what would your response be? The lion, am I right? Exactly. However, the lion here is not the performer of this action. The lion here is not a performer of the action. Performer? No. Rather, it is what? A receiver or undergoer. So the lion here is just the one receiving the action of being killed, or is the one undergoing the process of being killed, while David is now the one performing the action. Meanwhile, David here, by David together actually, because they are together, by David, is actually an adjunct. So this time around we have an adjunct that is actually the one performing the action. Can you see that that's a totally different thing from all you've always known initially? So let me go over this again. David, in the first sentence, which is the active sentence, we have David killed the lion. David is your subject, killed is your predicator, the lion is your object. So the subject is usually, as it is normally, is performing the action. And if you've actually listened or watched our video on sentence elements, sentence or clausal elements, you would realize that normally we say that the subject is supposed to be the performer of an action. So in the active sentence, the subject is actually the performer of an action. Killed is your action, the lion is the receiver of an action, because we also say that the object is usually the receiver or the undergoer of an action. However, there is an exception to that definition or to that description of the subject and the object, because in the passive sentence, the subject of the passive sentence is not necessarily a performer of an action, but rather what? A receiver of an action or an undergoer of an action. So the subject of a passive sentence does not usually perform an action. It doesn't perform an action. It doesn't perform an action rather. On the other hand, it receives the action, or it undergoes the action denoted by the verb. So that is the description of a passive sentence. Do you understand that? So one active sentence is one whose subject is usually the performer of an action. A passive sentence, on the other hand, is one whose subject is usually the receiver or the undergoer of an action. So that's all about the description or the definition of a passive sentence. So let's go to the next thing, which is what? Transformational processes, if I'm not mistaken, right? So according to what we have here, the next thing after the definition or description is what we call transformational processes that occur in the formation of a passive sentence. So we have transformational processes. Now, so what are the transformational processes that take place in the formation of a passive sentence? There are three major transformational processes that actually take place in the formation of a passive sentence. So three transformational processes. And the first one is this. Number one, the active object becomes the passive subject. So the active object becomes the passive subject. What does that mean? Now look at this sentence. S-P-O. So we said David killed the lion. Now, active. And let's look at a passive counterpart. The lion was killed by David. So this time what we see here is that the active object becomes the passive subject, because this is your S, this is your P, and this is an A. So the active subject becomes the active object rather becomes the passive subject, as you can see. So that's the first transformational process that occurs in the formation of a passive sentence. So that means that there is the movement of the object, of the item that maintains the object position in the active sentence, the movement of that object to what? The subject position. So that is, there is movement there. So the first process is that there is movement of the object of the active sentence to the position of the subject in the passive sentence. So that's the first transformational process. Let's look at number two. Now we have the active verbal phrase. The active, now this would be a bit long, so sorry for this. The active verbal phrase which is also known as the predicator, if I'm not mistaken, if you still follow in our topic. The active verbal phrase, the predicator, becomes changed to a passive verbal phrase. And how does it become changed to a passive verbal phrase? Now, that is, we have which is formed by the addition of any form of the primary auxiliary verb be. To the existing verbal phrase. Host lexical verb now becomes, or better still, now gets changed to its past participle form. All we're trying to say here is that this is the simple formula for all we're trying to say here. Now we have the be verb plus the past participle form of the lexical verb. Now, what we're trying to say here is that look at this example. Now, killed is your predicator in the active sentence, but then was killed is your predicator in the passive sentence. So that means that killed, which is a normal verb in its past tense, because this is a past tense, the past tense of kill is killed. Now, so we already have the addition of a be verb, which is was. A be verb was.